980505A.
Yeah, nigga, what?
You made parole.
What?
Pack your stuff.
What the fuck?
And get the fuck out of here.
Hey, yo, man. It's about motherfucking time, man. Hey, yo, G, son. I got my papers, man. I'm out this motherfucker. Yeah. I'm out of jail, and I'm never going back again. Never selling heroin, never selling crack again.
Welcome to Patriot Act. I'm Hassan Minhaj. Shit, just mask. It's hard with the mask. Welcome to Patriot Act. I'm Hassan Minhaj. Look, I know. This is strange. You're used to seeing me in a giant studio on a glowing holodeck. Now, there's nothing. It feels like I'm about to tell you all the things I loved about the 80s. But don't worry. Don't think of this as a Netflix show compromising. Think of this as a YouTube video overachieving. Now, I'll be real. We were so excited to come back a few months ago. But like so many of you, the coronavirus shut us down. So we made some changes to keep our staff safe, which is why this is Patriot Act Quarantine Edition. We are now months into the pandemic that has brought the world to its knees. We're all avoiding human contact. We all dress like highway bandits at Trader Joe's, and we have all spent hours FaceTiming the neck fat of our loved ones. By now, you know how catastrophic the health crisis is. But we are only starting to understand the full scope of the economic crisis.
3.2 million more Americans filed for unemployment in the last week, pushing the total number out of work since the crisis began to 33.5 million.
Government's already spent more than $2 trillion to stimulate the economy. But frankly, there's no end in sight.
Where do you think the economy is going to go from here?
Well, in the short run, it's going down the tubes.
Yeah, the man who just took his senior class photo is right. All the jobs created since the recession got wiped out in 6 weeks. Millions of Americans are struggling to pay for basic necessities, but the biggest financial stress hanging over people is this.
That's the first thing on my mind, how we're going to pay the rent.
Just trying to figure out how I can keep my roof over my head.
How am I supposed to pay my rent? I have children. My son said, Mom, I have $53.47. I can help you pay the rent. My son shouldn't worry about him paying the rent.
Look, we can debate all day about when the vaccine is going to drop. We've read the articles. Is it 12 months? Is it 18 months? People aren't worried about 18 months. They're worried about this month. Because this month is when rent is due. If you're going to shelter in place, you kind of need the shelter part. And right now, renters are way more vulnerable than homeowners. So no matter how much you got saved up, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, at some point, you're going to wonder, what happens if I can't pay rent? Because you got to know what to expect and what rights you do and don't have. The first thing you got to know is that you are not alone. Over 100 million Americans live in rental units. And in April, 2.3 million households did not pay any rent, a 135% increase compared to last April. And it's just starting. Even giant corporations aren't paying up. Subway, Nordstrom, H&M, Staples, Urban Outfitters, and the Cheesecake Factory have said they're not paying full rent during COVID-19. Now, Cheesecake Factory doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, look at them. They're like, look, we got a 50-page menu, and we sell pork sliders in a building that looks like a mosque in Dubai. We don't give any fucks. Look, giant corporations have leverage to negotiate with their landlords, but you don't. And your future depends on your landlord's generosity. There are some landlords, like Brooklyn's Mario Salerno, who waived April rent for all of his tenants. Then there's landlords like this.
I do not care if your tenant lost their job, if your tenant got sick, if grandma got sick, if their car broke down. All of that is irrelevant.
I do not care if grandma got sick. Cartman the slumlord was into letting grandma die even before it could help the economy. So that Midwest mullah from Duck Dynasty is named James Weiss, a property manager from Ohio. Even though that video was pre-COVID, a lot of landlords are taking his approach. In Queens, tenants got an email saying, COVID is terrible. However, rent is still due. In New Mexico, a landlord posted a list of homeless shelters on doors. And some landlords in Hawaii tried to extort their tenants for sex in exchange for rent relief. Now that is absolutely horrible, because you know they still were like, by the way, utilities aren't included. This is why tenants all across the nation are fed up.
From Los Angeles, Philadelphia to New York, tens of thousands of tenants banded together in the largest coordinated rent strike in decades.
I'm planning not to pay the next month, which is May.
And why is that?
Because I have to choose between paying rent or buying food for my family.
Yeah, that Vice reporter gets it. He hasn't gotten paid since 2015. By holding out on rent, Americans across the country are trying to pressure federal and state governments to cancel rent. That means the rent piling up during COVID would never have to be paid. Tools clear history, which would be great for tenants. But canceling rent has a lot of downstream effects. When you pay rent to your landlord doesn't just take all that money and blow it on a piñata full of ketamine suppositories. Your landlord uses that money to pay the mortgage on the building, as well as insurance, repairs, utilities, but most importantly, property taxes. Property taxes help pay for essential services like firefighters, utility workers, and teachers. So if you're wondering why no one's canceled rent, it's because states and cities are already strapped for cash. So if we all opt out and we're like, hey, nobody pay rent or cancel rent without help from the federal government, this game of economic dominoes will still end up hurting us. So renters have no good options, and the worst case scenario is coming fast.
Because of coronavirus, TJ Shuck is 3 weeks behind on his rent. But TJ's landlord is not waiting. She's filed a lawsuit to evict TJ and his family from their apartment.
Eviction is the crisis coming after the crisis. Without massive federal intervention, millions of Americans are going to be evicted who don't deserve it. Although, we all know about tenants that have definitely deserved it.
He rented his apartment out via Airbnb only to have a sex party hosted there, and then he was evicted.
We reported about how when Ari Tiemann used Airbnb to list his own sublet in Chelsea, the person who rented from him threw an orgy.
That is the most Craigslist thing to ever happen on Airbnb. The confidence to invite people on Twitter. You're like, Freak Fest, here's the address, tell your friends. My opinions reflect those of my employer. Send tweet. Also, I really hope Freak Fest is still on this year, but they're just on Zoom. Now, unless you're letting people host orgies in homes that don't belong to you, getting evicted during COVID is messed up. And the federal government knows that. That is why the stimulus bill actually halted evictions for 4 months. Which sounds great, but it only covers about 28% of all rental units. That's because the moratorium only applies to buildings subsidized by the federal government or buildings with federally backed mortgages, which means the stimulus bill does nothing for about 70% of renters. They're at the mercy of state and local laws, which are all over the place. You're also probably wondering, how am I supposed to know what type of mortgage my landlord has? Dude, I don't even know my landlord's last name. It's like, hey, Daryl, no eye contact, rent's in the envelope, let's not talk. Now you want me to figure out who Daryl banks with? We actually found a website where you can search a database to see if your building qualifies. The URL is complicated because of course it is, so we bought a simple one that'll take you there. Go to don'tgetkickedout.com to see if your building qualifies. But let's be real. Between the stimulus bill and the eviction moratoriums, these aren't fixes. They're Band-Aids. Because rent is still piling up, and when this is all over, it will be due.
The way things work now is that you don't have to pay your rent if you've got COVID-19 or a loss of income from it. But that rent isn't forgiven. What we have now is just an eviction postponement program. I see a tidal wave coming, and it scares the hell out of me.
A tidal wave of evictions. That is so terrifying. I'm not even going to make a joke about that dude's name being Bonin. Mike Bonin. And here's the thing you probably didn't know. Evictions were already bad before the pandemic. Pre-corona, landlords were filing over 2 million evictions a year. Eviction notices were getting pumped out like NBC dramas in Chicago. Also, that's over 2 million legal evictions, where your landlord has to go through multiple steps before the cops can remove you. Skip any of them and you're breaking the law. But that's exactly what some landlords are doing right now, even in places where courts are closed.
It is illegal to evict
a tenant without a judge's order. Reports of self-help evictions are increasing. That's when a landlord tries to evict a tenant by shutting off utilities, changing the locks, or removing belongings.
Did you hear that? An illegal eviction is called a self-help eviction, which sounds like a Netflix show where you find out you don't spark any joy. Technically, it's true. If you can't pay rent, you are clutter. But lots of landlords were illegally evicting long before this crisis. In fact, even if you always paid on time, they still might want you out so they can jack up rent prices. One way is through rent-eviction. Your landlord offers you, say, a buyout to leave. But if you don't take the deal...
Well, if you don't take the buyout, we are going to renovate this and you are going to have to live through the nightmare.
The construction to the apartments around them has been ongoing for the last year. They say shoddy work has led to broken pipes and water leaks.
All the person said was, I just want to let you know there's going to be a lot of rats from now on.
Honestly, my first reaction as a New Yorker was, how big are the rats? Because if they can't drag a large pizza down the stairs, I'm not shook. So what happens if your landlord is trying to evict you? Or your landlord is threatening you with rats and you need to deal with it? Well, it's all settled in the same place, housing court. And the most important thing to know is that the deck is stacked against you.
I spent the morning here in evictions court, room 6330. Landlord sat there, renters sat there. 13 cases were on the docket, and in every one I saw, the renters lost.
Why do you have to do it like MTV Cribs? It's like, yo, what up, fam? It's your boy Jason. I'm here in the depressing chamber of civic injustice, housing court. This is where the judge sits, this is the bathroom, and this is where the magic happens. And by magic, I mean the place where families have their lives destroyed. One of the reasons so many renters lose in housing court is because it is a maze of bureaucracy. You have to know the ins and outs of courthouse protocol and procedure, and if you screw up at any point, you automatically lose.
Many tenants are tripped up by the system.
They don't know the information about the court process. They don't know what to file.
She came to court dutifully, came to court early, and sat in the wrong courtroom.
When she realized her mistake, she dashed over and caught the landlord outside. But he doesn't want to speak with her.
And the court informed her that after 10 days, the sheriff would come in and remove her and her 3 children.
Ah, housing court is like doing a cappella in college. You thinking, but the beard says, come on my feet. A lawyer is also going to know about the best defense any tenant has in housing court. It's called the implied warranty of habitability, and it protects tenants in every state except Arkansas. It requires your landlord to keep the apartment livable, right? That means no rats, no broken pipes, and no families moving in as a statement on wealth inequality. And using this tactic in court stops evictions more than half the time. There's just one problem. No one knows about it. Over 1 year in Essex County, New Jersey, there were 40,000 eviction cases, but implied warranty of habitability was only used 80 times. That is 0.2% of the time. It's like Skype use during the pandemic. By the way, Skype, how did you drop the ball here? This was your moment. You had a 17-year head start, and Zoom ate your lunch in 2 weeks. Dude, you're a verb no one does. Your friend will be like, hey man, let me Skype you. Cool, send me the Zoom link. But say you go to housing court. Say you win, and you don't get evicted. You can still get screwed because of something called the tenant blacklist. Once your name is called in court, there are people that put your name on a list, and those people work for companies that sell those lists to landlords who then won't rent to you. It's like a burn book if Regina George could make you move back in with your parents. In most of the country, if your landlord takes you to housing court, you get put on the list. If you take them to housing court, you get put on the list. Even if you win in court, you get put on that goddamn list. There is no winning. It's like being an NFL quarterback. You may have won a Super Bowl. You also can't do CAPTCHA. Terry Bradshaw's just like, come on, honey. You know I can't do puzzles. Look, you don't need me to tell you how devastating eviction is. You can lose your job, your belongings, school placement for your kids, and obviously, your home.
Did you ever think that you could be homeless and living out of your vehicle?
No, not at all. But it can happen to anybody.
Kevin Racino says that after his rent increased nearly 30%, he could no longer afford an apartment.
I realized this is the first time I've ever walked
anyone through this. Like, I'm showing you my bedroom, and it